We all know how annoying it is when bird poo sticks to your car or window and you have to clean it off again. But what would you say if you heard that the economy of an entire country was turned 180 degrees with just this poo? Sounds funny, but that's exactly what happened in Peru in the 19th century during the so-called guano boom. Guano is the excrement of seabirds such as penguins or cormorants, which thanks to its unique properties served as an excellent fertilizer. But why did guano become so important for the USA and Europe in particular? And why did the guano boom cause so many problems for Peru, even leading to war? We answer all these questions in this video. Even the Incas used guano to fertilize their fields and even had laws to protect the seabirds. Of course, it was also common in Europe to use manure as fertilizer. However, the two types differed considerably in their components and their efficiency. More on this later. When Spain conquered Peru in the 16th century, knowledge about the use of guano was lost. It was not until the 18th century that they started using guano again. But why did guano become so popular? In the 17th and 18th centuries, industrialization took off, particularly in Germany, France, Great Britain, and the USA. This shift led to an increasing migration from rural areas to cities. Additionally, fields had been cultivated for decades, depleting their nitrogen content. The history of guano in Europe began in 1804, when the first guano samples were brought to Europe by Alexander von Humboldt. Analyzing these samples revealed that bird droppings have a very high concentration of nitrogen and phosphate, which is important for plant growth. Just for comparison, the usual organic fertilizers at the time had nitrogen contents of 0.5 to 1.5% and phosphate contents of 0.2 to 1%, while guano had 15% nitrogen and 4 to 5% phosphate. This was due to Peru's dry climate, which slowed down the decomposition process immensely. However, the trade in guano only really took off in the 1830s, after the country gained its independence from Spain in the 1820s and thus opened its harbors to other European powers. Due to the wars of independence, the Peruvian government had to borrow a lot of money from European countries. Therefore, in 1849, they concluded an agreement to pay off the remaining debt by selling guano. During these years, an industry emerged almost overnight, with thousands of ships dedicated solely to the guano trade. Guano became one of the most important commodities in the global economy. To show how important bird droppings became, one can refer to the Guano Islands Act, which is still in force today. This is a US law which states that islands on which US citizens find guano and which do not yet belong to any other nation are immediately incorporated into US territory. As mining was extremely strenuous due to the intense heat, many Chinese laborers were brought in. Unfortunately, most of them were bound by contracts that effectively turned them into slaves. At the time, the Peruvian government believed that increasing guano exports wouldn't be a problem, as they had enough reserves on their islands. This would later prove to be a costly mistake. The Chincha Islands were particularly important with their enormous guano reserves. These were also occupied by the Spanish in April 1864 to profit from the trade. This led to the so-called Guano War between Spain and Peru, Chile, Ecuador, and Bolivia, which ended with Spain's defeat in 1868. Over the next few years, demand continued to increase, and by the end of the 1870s, most of the guano reserves had been used up. As the quantity produced by the seabirds was no longer sufficient, the Peruvians began to stretch the guano with bat and seal droppings. The consequences of the guano boom were far-reaching for Peru. On the one hand, the export of the white gold brought the country enormous prosperity for a short time. The income from the sale of guano financed infrastructure projects, modernized parts of the economy, and enabled Peru to reduce its debt. However, the boom also had its downsides. The dependence on guano made Peru's economy extremely one-sided and vulnerable. When the deposits were exhausted at the end of the 1870s, the country was plunged into a severe economic crisis. When it became possible to industrialize the production of ammonia in 1913, guano became increasingly superfluous. Nevertheless, it is still used in organic farming, for example, where the focus is on natural and organic products. That's it for today. With this example, the saying, making money out of shit, has a completely different effect. If you would like to find out more about a forgotten German settlement in the middle of the Peruvian jungle, I can recommend my video. Have fun watching it and see you next time. Ciao!